Throughout the early 20th century, international travel was becoming a lot more common and also more accessible to the general public. Trains were racing from one country to another, and steamships were traversing the oceans for lands far away. New technologies like the zeppelin and airplane were starting to evolve too. In Canada, since 1885, the Canadian Pacific Railway, or CPR for short, was moving passengers from Montreal, Quebec to Vancouver in British Columbia, notably through the Rocky Mountains. Wealthy tourists were a common sight and rode in style with classy passenger cars and staying in luxury hotels. This attracted the attention of Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph in 1911, who was looking for ways to attract foreign tourists and put Austria on tourist maps. An Austria delegation was sent over to Canada, and they were rather impressed with the modern operation. Late in 1911, Canadian Pacific and Austrian State Railways signed a promotional deal which would have CPR operate observation cars on the Austrian railway network. Canadian Pacific already had steamships operating to Europe, so the railway wasn't a stranger to foreign deals. The new coaches were of a Canadian and European design hybrid. The brown wooden exteriors were made of a varnished teak, accompanied by brass fittings. A pair of buffers and European couplings were added, along with modifying the underside to European standards. On the interior, 33 leather armchairs were divided amongst two sections. The observation cars were planned to have North American-style open-air platforms on the rear, but due to concerns of Austria's long railway tunnels and smoke inhalation due to the steam locomotives, the open-air platform was replaced with semi-open glass platforms. At 22.6 meters long, the coaches were the longest in Europe at the time. The first 3 coaches were built at the Ringhofer Works in Prague in 1912, and the last 5 at Nesselsdorf in 1913. The cars were numbered 101 to 108 and had names like Canada, Europe, America, and Austria. The inauguration of the first 3 cars took place in August 1912 as a multi-day event bringing in around 300 international guests. A party took place at the Vienna Rathaus, and government representatives spoke positively of the railway. At the Westbahnhof, the Canadian coaches were consecrated by the Canadian Father Burke. The inaugural run offered the guests trips to Melk and Salzburg, including a boat trip on the Danube River. A dinner with officials and receptions with members of the imperial family was held as well. The train rode over the Deltarune Bahn to Trieste, where the guests later spent the night on a luxury steamship from Austrian Lloyd. The train would return over the Semmeringbahn. The International Sleeping Car Company assisted in operations of the Austro-Canadian trains and later took over management as language barriers made operations difficult. Back in Canada, newspapers proudly wrote about Canada now developing a part of Europe instead of the other way around. British news media were impressed with the parties held, and the Illustrated London News featured a 2-page illustration of the train done by Cyrus Cuneo. The main demographic for the Austro-Canadian trains were Canadian, British, and American tourists, with printed material commonly being in English. The trains ran on 3 routes: Vienna to Salzburg and Innsbruck, and westbound, the Arlbergbahn ran to the Swiss border, with connections to Zurich, Paris, and London. The trains also traveled south over the Deltarune and Karawankenbahn to the multicultural trade port of Trieste by June 1913. While in service, the observation cars proved rather popular. First and second class passengers paid $1 to use the car, featuring an onboard library and secretary to provide typing and telegraph service. In March 1913, CPR developed a steamship line to Trieste, connecting with the observation car trains. This line also served thousands of poor emigrants buying a one-way ticket to Canada. Tensions soon began to rise, however, as Austrian and German shipping companies now felt like their monopoly was being threatened and began a smear campaign against the Canadian Pacific Railway. The railway was blamed for a complete exodus of Austrian conscripts, with CPR being sued and concessions were suspended. This led to the observation car service being shut down. With the onset of the Great War, later known as World War I, and Austria-Hungary and Canada being on opposing sides, Austria seized control of Canadian Pacific's coaches and used them as hospital cars for the Austrian army. After the war's end, and to Canadian surprise, the observation cars were returned in fairly good condition. Tourism had plummeted in Austria post-war, but the Canadian car saw a new career in Italy beginning in 1920. They were sold to the Italian State Railways, being based out of Milan. They operated around the Italian peninsula as Carrozze Belvedere, now being painted green. In the late 20s until 1935, they were modernized and used on a special train for Prime Minister Benito Mussolini. During World War II, the Canadian cars were once again used as hospital and shelter cars for refugees. After the war, the old observation coaches went around Europe, but were used less and less in revenue service. All the cars were ultimately scrapped sometime in the 1970s. To think they were still around during Canadian Pacific's rebranding in 1968. but this would finally put an end to the Canadian Pacific Railway's European adventure. Thanks for watching, and big thanks to the site Retours, and this site I'm not going to try pronouncing the name of, for all the information in this video. I really couldn't find any other source beyond these sites about this topic, so go check them out. Sorry if I mispronounced anything, I hope the pronunciations I looked up were accurate. I'm just not as well versed in foreign railroad history. I also hope you don't mind the shorter length of this commentary video compared to my other usual longer ones. I'm trying out shorter videos as due to college graphic design projects really dragging me down recently. I really just don't have the energy or motivation for longer videos, but hopefully that'll change soon once the semester ends. Anyway, let me know what you thought of this video, and thank you again for watching.